I'll just dissect that a little bit further. I'm joined in studio by Social Policy Initiative Executive Director Isobel Frye, and we'll also be joined a little bit later on by Co-Director of the Economic Modeling Academy, Dr. Barry Hotla, as well as online, joined by Saftu spokesperson Trevor Shaku, and we are joined by you on 072-110-5584, and we're asking you the question, is this a people-friendly budget in the year of election? And you've heard some of the things that have been outlined in that insert. Isobel, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on. Trevor, thank you very much for coming on. Good to have you with us. Let's start with yourself in the studio, Isobel. Is this a people-friendly budget?
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I would have to say definitively not. We know that we've been facing austerity budgets for the last successive 9 years, and this continues in trade. In fact, what we were saying off air, what I was saying to you is that during the MTBPS, a number of cuts, very severe cuts, were promised. Now, some of those have been handed back, and that sleight of hand for many might have appeared to be a lessening of austerity, but absolutely at the heart of it, it's a reduction of expenditure on public goods, which is what, as the most unequal country in the world, a country facing incredibly high poverty rates on a daily basis for ordinary people, we need to be seeing a lot more pumped into the social wage than been cut.
So say that a little bit slowly for us so that we understand. You see, what seems like what the minister says is a reversal of the reductions announced in 2023 is just merely him last year in the medium-term budget threatening. And now he said, okay, fine, I'm not going to take that anymore. But it's not really 58 billion rands that is being added.
No, so in October, we were warned that there would be very severe budget cuts with a decline in revenue take, etc. And many of those, particularly in health and education, have been handed back. So they've, instead of being cut, they were reaffirmed, they were put back into the place that they've been taken out from. Yeah.
He says, well, this is going to the bargaining council agreements that largely has to do with teachers. I suppose it's the question of doctors that are unemployed and the nurses.
Yeah, so what we see in the budget is that although it's a balance sheet, there are a number of back agreements that feed into it, and that would be part of that as well.
Yeah, all right. I'll come back to you in a moment. Let me bring in Trevor. Trevor, is this a people-friendly budget? You know, every time we speak about this situation where they say we are spending more than we are getting in, so revenue is not that great, right? But we are continuing to spend. And at this particular point, 60% of what we are spending is going into the salaries and is going into social grants and the likes, and very little seemingly going towards the infrastructure. So they say it's either we borrow or we cut spending or we tax people more. And most of the time we don't talk about the other fourth one, which is we make things work better. If the economy grows, people will pay more tax, more people will be working, and therefore we'll have more money to spend. I suppose those are the four options. The minister has chosen to go the route of obviously not spending more, cut expenditure, it seems, and dipping into the reserves, getting some 150 billion rands to offset the debt situation.
Look, one, we do not accept the seesaw argument or analogy that says that if they are provisioning money for the compensation bill of workers in the public service, it will take away from infrastructure, equipment, and other variable goods which ought to be procured by departments to be able to do their work. So we do not firstly accept that argument. But secondly, we've got to highlight that we think that the fiscal consolidation is on course, and we reiterate our opposition to it. And if you look at the current consolidated expenditure, especially as outlined in the budget review, you realize that even though there might be some nominal increases in allocations to certain departments, what remains is that in real terms over the medium-term expenditure framework, you'll still continue to see declines. For instance, if you look at the social development, there would be a 2% in real decline. And this real decline, of course, we calculated by comparing the average growth over the medium expenditure framework and the inflation rate over the term inflation over the medium term period. Now, it shows that aggregated and averaged, it gives you a 4.7%. Now, most of these allocations and rate growth of allocations to these departments over the coming 3 years would be below 4.7. And this goes to health, this goes to arts, culture and sports, it goes to security and defense, but also Home Affairs. Home Affairs is not only receiving a real decline in their allocation, but also a nominal decline. Combined, the real impact of such particular decline would be 9.8%. And this is a department which is, of course, met by incapacity, because what we have seen in the past is the inability on the part of such particular department to be able to do what it ought to do, which is to ensure that there's modernization, there's digitization of data, but also ensure that all other things which require the human resource on the part of Home Affairs are done. And if you check their annual reports from 2022-2023 financial year, you'll see there that actually the post establishment is somewhere in the region of 18,000, but the field posts there are about 7,000. And this brings us to the idea, or rather to the point we made at the beginning about the seesaw, rejecting the seesaw argument or analogy about having to take from compensation of employees to meet infrastructure and equipment commitments. Now, we think that, firstly, the National Treasury has to increase the compensation bill for the public service, not necessarily and not only and narrowly to cover the increases in wage increments as struck out of the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council, but we are saying that it must increase the public service compensation bill to ensure that there is no longer a reduction in the headcount in the public service. If you look at their medium-term budget policy statement documents, an annexure on compensation of employees and the number of employees in the public service, you'll realize that of all the departments except for education, all of them experience negative growth in the headcount. And this shows that there is understaffing that is underway, and we have in the past highlighted that this is a problem. So the continuous attack on the compensation bill is problematic.
Yeah. So coming back to you then, Isobel, I know you would be quite interested. I'll come back to Trevor and speak about the tax a little bit later. But you would have wanted particularly to see that social security network expanded a little bit further than what we are currently seeing. What do you make of the nominal increases in old age grants to 2,185, foster care grants 1,180, child support grant by a mere 20 rands to 530?
Well, I mean, similar to what Trevor's analysis was on other lead departments, what we've seen are nominal increases and real decreases. So from the child support grant up to the old age grant, each person who receives a grant is going to have less purchasing power than they did last year. In the face of very steep increases in food inflation, we know that international geopolitics constantly is pushing up the cost of food through oil, etc. So people are much poorer and continue to get poorer. What I wanted to talk about is the social relief of distress grant, because I think we we annually have this conversation.
Absolutely. So what we're hearing is that there is some changes that are going to be brought to this, improvements, they say, by April 2024 and extension beyond 2025. What does that mean?
Your guess is as good as anybody else's. I mean, the interesting thing, just the backstory on the social relief of distress, is that on Valentine's Day, on the 14th of Feb, the Minister of Social Development issued a government gazette calling for comment on why she should not extend the social relief of distress grant at 350. So in a way, that was preempting what the budget was going to announce. That was very unusual. But in addition to that, if you look at the 350, and you take it back, so it hasn't increased since May 2020. And in effect, the purchasing power of 350 in May 2020 is only 269 Rand now. So that's effectively a 25% discount on what people can get. So something which was half of the food poverty price, or the food poverty line when it was introduced, has now been reduced by a further quarter. So if you're trying to see, I mean, the research that we do at SPI is looking at the catalytic transformative elements of social security. But there has to be a certain value that is given to people which they can use to have that transformative approach. If it's too little, it's basically just crumbs. And that's what we're seeing. People are not getting enough to meet their basic needs. And in addition to that, the economy is not getting that stimulus to get it to which is what we require. I mean, with the downgrade of the growth forecast, what we should be seeing is a massive economic stimulus. And that's what we've been saying year on year, is do it through the social grants, get money into township economies, rural economies, and build it up through that. And yet, time and time again, we see the opposite. The question about what the improvements are is also, as we said, is interesting. Now, some are concerned that they're going to tighten the means test and therefore reduce the eligible number of people who are able to receive it. We don't know. The president in the SONA announced that they were going to be looking at social assistance, which is another word for grants, for the unemployed. Now, is this an attempt to try and merge this social relief of distress to the labour market activation policies, which would be, quite frankly, unless that infrastructure is in place, a massive disaster?
Yeah. Social Policy Initiative Executive Director Isobel Frye is still with us. So we've got Dr. Padi Lihutla coming on in just a moment. Trevor Shaku, spokesperson for Saftu, and we've got you tonight on the line. Trevor, let's take you back again. 150 billion rands. Instead of going to borrow, there is this reserves that we have. So they're going to do some kind of review calculation of them to say when we put them aside, this is how much they were worth. They are now worth a little bit more, so we can be able to take 150 billion from that and be able to at least take care of the debt servicing costs, which they are saying now absorb a good 20% of the revenue, 356 billion rand. Is that a good move?
Look, we have called in the past for the use of those reserves because we think that there could be, of course, a number of, you require a number of reserves to be able to meet your import, export type of commitments, import cover in particular. Now, and it has been calculated before that whatever Treasury has at the current moment, or rather whatever South Africa has at the current moment, was far higher than that. And a certain portion of that could be used
so
to
you're saying
manage.
Far higher than 507 billion, I think that's what they said, is where they are calculated right now?
Yes, but I mean, like, in terms of the import cover is far less than what is calculated, and that's the reason why some of it is planned to be used in that instance. But we've maintained in the past that the government, which is a currency issuer, is not necessarily under serious constraints as would be projected by Treasury. Because what Treasury does is to give out a view, and they repeated it again today. They said that the problems here is the problem of accumulation of government debt that crowds out spending. But also they went on further to say that in that particular problem of accumulating debt, the problem will be the debt servicing costs, which have been higher. Now, we need to isolate two things here. The first one is that we have debt that has to be disaggregated, because the debt in South Africa has to be disaggregated into foreign denominated debt and domestic denominated debt. And this is where the argument of a currency issuer plays a bigger role, because if you are a currency issuer, you cannot fail to meet spending obligations that are denominated in your own currency. And we have a central bank that issues the South African rand, and 85% of South Africa's debt is denominated in domestic currency. So what would actually lead South Africa to fail in meeting its spending obligations, especially in repayment of debt which comes to maturity? This is the first part. The second part is that we have been told that apart from the debt servicing costs, apart from the issue of mounting debt, the problem is debt servicing costs. But here again, what they are not telling the South African public is that the issue of interest rates levied on the government bonds, which are recorded on the Treasury's balance sheet as government debt, are actually a policy matter, not an issue that is subjected to the whims of the market, as they would have us to think. Because what they've been saying is that when government, and this is the classical neoliberal argument around that, they say that when government borrows, it crowds out private sector investments. How does it do this? They say it does this by raising interest rates on the fund of amount of money that has to be competed for by both the private sector and the public sector, which, by the way, is a wrong analogy. But because they are moving from that particular point of view, their assumption, therefore, is that if government continues to borrow, it will then push interest rates upward, leading to the private sector unable to borrow and invest. So that is the classical argument that they are putting forward. But we are disagreeing with that. We are saying that the issue of government debt and the interest paid on that particular government debt is a policy matter. Government is not pushed by any market forces to raise the interest on government bonds. It is a prerogative, rather, of government and national treasury in particular to price those particular bonds. It can choose not to elevate the interest rates on government bonds and still suppress them. Various countries across the world are doing that. Yeah. And to show indeed that government is not subjected to the whims of the market to determine the interest on servicing government bonds is illustrated by the fact that the people who are taking their monies in government bonds, which are considered to be safe assets or risk-free assets, are actually coming not because government requires their money, but because they want to pack money in those assets.
Let's go a little bit slowly on that. What you're saying is that 85%, which is domestic borrowing, is all made up of government bonds, the whole lot.
It's made up of government bonds, a whole lot of it. There might be others which are raised through
financial institutions in the market, isn't it?
But in the main point to take away from this argument is that this is denominated in the South African rand. Yeah. And the South African government cannot fail to meet any spending obligation that is denominated in its own currency.
So there is the 15% that is US dollar generated, which they are saying they are paying as well. So the whole sum is 356 billion. So where is this 356 billion going? If you're saying, it's a simple policy thing, they can just simply change it in the policy.
So if you look at the South African Reserve Bank's bulletin, you'll see there that the debt that is owed to foreign holders of that particular debt is up to 175, if not 185 billion US dollars. 90.1 billion of that is denominated in foreign currency. So of the debt servicing costs, which we are told are the ones crowding out expenditure of government in other areas of spending, is actually divided, of course, between the two. But what we are arguing is that, of course, the government debt that is denominated in foreign currency is real debt for us, because we do not issue any currency that is issued outside, such as the Japanese yen or the pound sterling or the US dollar. Yeah. So in that instance, we are obligated to pay that. And because we are not issuing that, we will be able to fail to meet such spending obligations. But we are saying that a huge chunk of the rest of the debt is not denominated in foreign currency, and therefore South Africa is not under a severe constraint to raise such particular amount. It is a matter of accounting between the central bank and the national treasury to be able to pay that particular debt. We will never fail to meet spending obligations. Why would we be obligated to go into secondary market to pay, or rather to buy what we issue? This does not make sense in the first place. Because the argument, actually, if you follow it, it says that the South African government, which is the issue of the South African rand, goes into the secondary and the third market to go and borrow the same currency that we are issuing. That is nonsense, in my view. And that is the reason why we are arguing that any debt denominated in the South African currency, the South African government will never fail to pay it. So the idea of problems around government having to service debt that is ballooning, and therefore it is crowding out expenditure, and that is the reason why they are trying to arrest expenditure on public goods and services, is problematic, and in our view rests on a false premise. A false premise that comes with pretenses that government is under severe constraint, when we know as a matter of fact that the debt that is denominated in South African rands is a debt that we can always pay at any time.
Okay, we'll come back to you in a moment and expand on that. Isobel, you're saying there needs to be stimulus, right? The minister speaks of a 0.6% GDP growth in 2023, which was a reduction from 0.8%. He's projecting a 1.6% growth in 2024 and 2026, depending on the energy situation improving, of course, as they believe that they're getting a handle on that. They've got 7.9 million people, young people in particular, who are unemployed. If you look at those numbers, that in 2008, around 2012, the growth would have been sitting at about 4.5 GDP, and that created 1.4 million jobs for young people. If we are talking 1.6% growth, what kind of jobs are we going to create?
Well, I think we need to take away the narrative which we keep on getting fed, which is that we've just got to wait for economic growth and then the jobs will follow. Because as you say, we have had a complete low growth trajectory for at least the last 7 years. So we don't see anything that's going to change in that regard. Our energy crisis is going to continue. I think we need to look starkly at the figures. So 11.7 million, actually, 11.8 million are the number of people who are out of a job. The other point that we look at SPI is long-term unemployment. So structural unemployment is people who've been out of a job for 12 months or more. And globally, their chances of getting back into employment are incredibly low. 77% of our workforce is in long-term unemployment. So again, we've got pressure from people entering the labour market, 800,000 people entering the labour market per year, in addition to the 11.7 million, and the stickiness of getting people out of that. The point about public works, which constantly comes up almost as a false binary, like we'll either give people income through grants or we'll give them income through public works. Now, public works have always been a policy to absorb people in times of crisis. The critical line is pay people money to dig a hole and then fill it up. Now, that's not the kind of job that we want. We don't want people to be working for the sake of working. The point of the stimulus through social grants is that it gives people money to do the kinds of work that they are doing already. We've got an informal economy which is burgeoning, but the growth of the informal economy is constrained because people don't have enough disposable income to support that. Yeah. So no one's going to create 12 million jobs overnight or with any feasible future with the growth that we have. Start looking at what kind of jobs we can do, which is to promote small micro enterprises where people are doing the kinds of things that they want, and then start looking at the input micro policies. So look at, for instance, what kind of data costs are we having? Look at things such as procurement. Are people able to purchase? But also start looking at revolutionizing the incentivization of people. So if you get a 1,500 universal basic income grant, which is what we are proposing, or a 350 social relief of distress, and you're able to use that in order to generate more, why not incentivize that person by giving them additional? What we see with the means test, and this is what you're asking about the improvements, Treasury constantly tries to limit the number of people who are eligible, despite their need, by having a very, very low means test. Now, that prevents people, from the research that we've done, people who are starting small businesses, really small businesses, have stopped that. Because
I want you to expand on that and tell me a little bit more what those incentives would look like, because others would have suggested that, for example, young people need to be able to demonstrate that they're actually actively looking for work to continue receiving those grants. So before the break and during the break, we're talking something rather interesting. So you're saying there is the condition that you could put to say what is the condition for you to continue to receive the grant, and some of the conditions that government itself has put in place to say if there's activity in your bank account, forget it, you won't get that 350 social relief of distress grant. But you're saying you can go further and put some incentives on it.
Absolutely. So globally, governments try to stimulate job creation. We also have to remember that some countries have excess jobs. We have 42% not enough jobs. So people, to think that people are not going for jobs is a fallacy. We've got to realize that we need to be encouraging people to be creating their own jobs, not to go and look for jobs that don't exist, because that's a waste of money, and it leads to, I mean, we've got a discouraged workforce of 3 million people. People have given up looking for work. Yeah. But I'm not.
So there's this view that young people just get the 350 and sit on it, and really they're just waiting for the 350 to come, and they spend it on the weekend, and that's it.
Yeah. Now, none of that is based on evidence or fact. We've spent a lot of time with qualitative interviews with people who receive it. What people do is they invest it. They get credit. There was one builder who got credit from a hardware store and was able to start building. And he immediately started building. As soon as his bank account got in some of the profits from which he actually had to pay back to the hardware store, the government stopped the 350. And so the hardware store stopped the credit. His entire business plan came to an end, and he's back on the street with absolutely nothing. So what I was saying to you is there are many exciting ways in which you can incentivize people. That if you receive government grant money and you use that to multiply it through a micro-entrepreneurial enterprise, that you can be rewarded through airtime, for instance, through a bank could give you additional monies into your account. We have the entire approach wrong. We try to penalize people. We try to punish people if they do things. So if you make money from the money we give you, we take your money away. Now, who in their right mind is going to use that money to start a small business if they know that next month it's not going to be there? The point about bank accounts is also incredibly punitive, because a lot of people, poorer people, share bank accounts. So you receive money for your mother into your bank account, and suddenly you don't receive that which you're entitled to. So when government talks about improving the social relief of distress grant, there are many really exciting things that we can do. But just to share, I was talking to the Spanish Minister of Employment about their grant, which is similar to the COVID-19, the social relief of distress grant. Yeah. And I said, do you link it to conditions that you have to get jobs? And she looked at me in Zoom, okay, and in Spanish, and then she was like, no, why would I waste government money doing something which globally has been proven not to work? And so we need to learn from the lessons. To try to use conditions in order to get people into jobs doesn't work. Yes. But there are ways in which you can encourage people to become their own, to start their own businesses, to employ people in their neighborhood. That's what we need to be doing.
Trevor, one final point that I wanted you to weigh in on: multinational corporate tax, 15% regardless of where you make your profits. I know you've been calling for more corporate tax. Is that a step in the right direction?
Look, we wanted them to increase corporate tax. It is clear that because when they introduce corporate income tax, their idea is premised on the idea to try to attract private sector investment, like incentivize private sector to bring more investment by making it easier for them to make profits. So because for the last 10 years we have seen investment strike in this country, it shows that the private sector is not willing to actually invest in the economy, and therefore the attempts to reduce corporate income tax as a way of incentivizing them are not working. But secondly, because that is the case, we've also got to look at the fact that they are even demanding more of government-backed guarantees. They want de-risking assets in various areas of productive sectors of our economy so that they can be able to. So it is a layer of people who are not willing, in my view, to actually come and invest. And therefore, all these measures, including the reduction of corporate income tax, are not bearing fruits according to those who conceived them, to try to attract foreign direct investments, amongst others. So we wanted the National Treasury to consider the increase of the corporate income tax so that that money would be redistributed. And this, of course, rests on our argument that taxation, for the most part, we are demanding it, not necessarily because we are under illusion that government is constrained by revenue collection to be able to spend, but we are calling for it as a redistributive measure so that the resources can move from one side of the economy of non-government consolidated sector to another side of the non-government consolidated sector, mostly the poor, who are, of course, households. So that's what we've been calling for. But we've been also calling for the taxation on the top 1%, so that we can be able to again redistribute such particular wealth. Because the obscene levels of richness that these people are holding without reinvesting this particular wealth that they are holding is problematic and only serves to continue the inequalities and deepen them that have, of course, and are logical results and consequence of a capitalist mode of production, in which, of course, a limited few number of people own the means of production and hoard the wealth that comes out of that. And the rest of us who depend on selling our labor to subsist continue to be impoverished. So it is on those bases that for redistributive purposes and distributive purposes, we want that the income tax of corporations to be increased.
Trevor, I appreciate your time. Let's leave it there. Thank you very much for coming on. Trevor Shaku and Isobel Frye, much appreciated, and thank you for coming in this evening. And of course, as we wrap up, those breaking news that you're saying there on the side, National Assembly deciding to support a vote for the impeachment of Judge Mthatha. We'll give you more details at the top of the hour. Stay with us.